So hi everyone and welcome once again to my video blog. So today I'm going to tell you about a rather interesting topic. I'm going to talk about the brain and gender and also gender differentiation and how it relates to transsexuality. So a little introduction first. Recently I have stumbled upon some websites run by so-called radical feminists and found that many of them basically hate transsexuals and see us as some kind of a menace or a caricature of women. They claim that we're invading women's only spaces and that we're mentally ill and basically spies from the patriarchy, seeking to oppress them and destroy gender equality. They refuse to recognize male-to-female transsexuals as women. They really have a big issue with male-to-female transsexuals, not so much with female-to-male for some reason. And they refer to SRS as butchery and compare it to amputation, etc. These people are extremely hostile. And they make this argument that if society were free of imposed gender roles, there would be no transsexuals. They view gender identity and those things as purely socially constructed. And to me, basically, it says that these people are refusing to acknowledge that there are some innate physiological differences in the male and the female brain. These people think that all gender behaviors are learned, that babies are born with no real gender identity, and that they pick up masculine or feminine behaviors from their parents, that they can be taught a baby can be taught to act like a man or act like a woman. And this is not some new thing. It's a line of thinking that dates back to the 60s and 70s and that is strongly associated with feminism. And which in my opinion is just plain wrong. There's definitely some social behaviors that are conventions that are learned, like men open doors for women, skirts in North America are for women only, etc., etc. Those things are definitely learned and not innate. But I believe that some traits, some fundamental traits and behaviors and attitudes must stem from some innate biological differences between men and women. And I'm gonna explain why. So why? Well, it's because of evolution. It's pretty obvious that men and women have evolved to have some different physical characteristics. So some people will point out it's a continuum, and that's true. But some things are definitely considered male or female. Women have much wider hips in proportion to their waist on average than men. Men on average are significantly taller. Men have facial hair in general. And there's a bunch of other things that you could point to. Men tend to have bigger feet, bigger hands, etc., etc., etc. And also in general, men tend to have penises, women tend to have vaginas. No need to point out the obvious. And, well, this doesn't just apply to external physical differences. Those things are obvious, you can see them just by looking at people. But it also applies to internal organs. Maybe you didn't notice, but males have higher lung capacity than women on average. So men can breathe in more air because they have bigger lungs on average. And this is possibly one of the reasons why men have a larger rib cage, to fit bigger lungs. And nobody denies any of those things. You can look at people, and measure all those things, and they're obvious. But of course, like I said, it's a continuum. Those are average trends, but they are definitely there. But then, in light of all these physical differences, how and why would the brain not show any gender differences as well? If our bodies have evolved for specific purposes, if men and women are very physically different, if our internal organs are significantly different on average, many of them, why would the brain of men and women be identical? And in fact, it does show some differences. People have again done measurements in the brain and do see that there are some differences in the structure of the brain of men and women that you can observe, just when you're doing a brain scan of someone or an X-ray or things like that, or when you do an autopsy. But anyways, consider this idea again that men and women have some identical brain. This theory from the 60s and 70s. Well, it's a hard theory to test, because feminists will claim that it's almost impossible to eliminate all the social pressure for people to conform to gender, etc., etc., and that women are still oppressed, and that's why women even today, are forced into more feminine gender roles, and etc., etc. But this theory has been tested in at least one case that I know of. It's the case of David Reimer. So David Reimer was an unfortunate little boy. His parents decided to circumcise him, and unfortunately it went wrong. Basically, he ended up with no more penis after the circumcision. And so what did the parents do? They panicked. They didn't know what to do. They thought, their son would never be happy without a penis. So they decided to go seek some help. And they found Dr. John Money, who believed that gender identity was determined by nurture much more than by nature. And that, you could raise someone to act like a man or a woman. And he wanted to take this opportunity to test his theory, basically. So he took this little boy as some kind of experiment. And he suggested to this little boy's parents that he be raised as a girl, that he was to be told that he was female, always, that he should be dressed as female, given little girls' toys, that the truth should be completely hidden from this little child. And this doctor believed that this child would grow up, with a female gender identity and develop feminine behaviors and be a happy woman. And their plan was just, to perform a sex change during the adolescence of this boy and to give him female hormones and basically, put him through what transsexuals go through. And that this boy would be happy this way, living as a woman. Unfortunately, this experiment was a total failure. So from very early on, his parents saw that he preferred boys' toys. He had a lack of interest in boys at puberty. He was described as tomboyish. He didn't really like women's clothes, etc., etc. Was ostracized at school, rejected by the other girls. Had a very hard time, a strong discomfort with the female identity that was being imposed on him. And eventually, his parents told him the truth when he was 14. And at that moment, he immediately rebelled and decided he was going to live as a man for the rest of his life. And he did. But unfortunately, he became depressed and committed suicide at age 38 in 2004. So I think this is a very sad case, but I think it's a pretty clear illustration, that even if you put a lot of effort into it, raising a little boy as a little girl doesn't really work. Because the little boy has some innate tendencies that show up and has some innate instinct that tells him, I am not a little girl, and it doesn't work. So I think this can shed some insight and probably, provide some credence to the idea that male and female brains have some innate differences that produce innate differences in behavior. But anyways, what does it mean when I talk about a male or a female brain? I think it's a difficult question. And I've had some arguments, about this with my girlfriend, because, it's really hard to define, especially in light of transsexuality and everything, what does it mean to have a male or female brain? Well, as you've pointed out earlier, many people think that gender is a continuum, so you can be more on the masculine side, you can be more on the feminine side, you can have characteristics, that are more masculine or feminine, but there's an infinite number of possibilities, basically. But if we take averages over the entire population, and then, take different averages for the people who define themselves as male or people who define themselves as female, I think we will see some clear tendencies, We'll see some behavioral tendencies or some anatomical tendencies that are more associated with men and women. And there are probably circuits in the brain, basically, that get activated or deactivated depending on your exposure to hormones such as estrogen and testosterone. This is basically probably what it boils down to. When you're physically male, your testicles produce a ton of testosterone. This testosterone gets into your blood, it flows throughout your body, masculinizes your body, masculinizes your brain as well, and activates some circuits in your brain that produce more masculine behavioral tendencies. And evolutionarily speaking, in terms of reproduction, males are taught to be more aggressive. They're taught to have evolved to be hunters, to have a stronger sex drive, a drive to mate with as many women as possible, and to compete with other males, for the better females. While females, seek to attract and choose suitable mates and retain them, and to raise and protect their children. And for women, evolutionarily speaking, it has been said that getting pregnant has a much higher risk. A woman, if she gets pregnant, she has to spend a whole 9 months, in a position where she's basically disadvantaged compared to everybody else. She needs possibly more food, and physically she's less able to follow the rest of the group. If you're thinking of humans living in some primitive tribe somewhere, thousands of years ago. So basically, for a woman, becoming pregnant is a huge risk, and so it makes sense that women would have a lower sex drive and that they wouldn't seek to mate all the time. Women really want to find a man who, once they get pregnant, will not leave them. And when you look at society today, it seems to make sense. This is what seems to happen. Men seem to have a higher sex drive than women. They want to have sex with more women. And women, tend to be more choosy. And also, if you look at the behavior of people, it's very rare that women will hit on men. Usually it's men that will go hit on women, and women will choose whether they accept, to go out with a guy or not. And probably, there's some kind of innate thing in that, because I think in today's society, it would be perfectly reasonable for women to hit on men, but they almost never do. And there's also studies that have been done about the sex drive of men and women that have shown that men think about sex much, much more than women. And I really don't think that's a learned behavior. But anyways, in terms of other behaviors, in sexual reproduction, there's been experiments that have been done on monkeys that have shown, for example, that male monkeys tend to play with toy cars or diggers or more masculine toys, if given the choice, while female monkeys prefer dolls, toys that look like little babies, basically, that they can take care of or something. And this experiment is interesting because it shows that possibly, these tendencies, these behaviors are innate. Those monkeys don't have to conform to human social standards. They've never been taught about those things. They don't really know what a toy car or a little doll is. The male monkey is maybe just more interested in a toy car because it's something that moves and that he can perform an activity, that conforms more to his male behaviors, of going around and exploring things and all that, and doing more dynamic activities. Well, for the female monkey, the doll will kind of get her instincts, her maternal instincts stimulated and will be more interesting to her. And, if we observe North American society too nowadays, I think it's true that there's still unfairness towards women, but women have made a lot of progress, and nowadays, women make out about 50% of the students in medical schools. And I think, med school is a field that's very elitist. There's a lot of pressure to perform. It's very hard to get into med school. So I think there's no denying, that at some point this was a male-dominated field. There were no female doctors. And women have had to make their place into med school. And they did successfully. And I think, it's very possible that in a certain number of years, women will completely dominate the medical field. But why is this interesting? Well, I think it's interesting because if you compare it to other areas, like electrical engineering, you will see that there are almost no women in electrical engineering. And in a field like computer science, where I am, there's also much less women. There are still women, but it's like a quarter, a tenth of the number of men in the field. And from my personal experience in computer science, women seem to dislike computer programming. There's some activities that they seem to prefer that seem to be more, theoretical, high-level, mathematical, and things like that. But they don't seem to like as much to go into hardware and building logical systems where there's a lot of, grunt work, I guess, or puzzling around to try to fix problems and things like that. And I think, this is maybe because of innate tendencies again. Women are swarming the medical field because it's interesting to them. And maybe the reason they don't get into the engineering field is because it is not interesting to them, because the engineering field is also something, that I think is portrayed as cool. If you watch TV, when you listen to science programs, I think technology is portrayed as being something interesting too, just as interesting as medicine. But for some reason, women are choosing medicine. And I can tell you, here in Canada, I feel like computer science, I really don't think it's a sexist field. Because, I've been there, and the director of the School of Computer Science at my university was a woman for pretty much all the time I was there. And I had several female teachers, and they were very good and very skilled. And these people would never, give lower grades to females or try to discourage them from getting into computer science. On the contrary. In fact, female students even had access to some scholarships that male students couldn't have access to, as some kind of encouragement to get into the field. But anyways, beyond that, how does this relate to transsexuality? Well, as I said earlier, many people claim that transsexuality is some kind of mental illness, and it's not just radical feminists. There's also, just random people and even some psychiatrists, they think that transsexuals are just insane, they just imagine that they're women, but it doesn't make sense because, men and women's brains are the same or something. But many studies have been done and have shown, for example, that male to female transsexuals have brain anatomies that are closer to female brain anatomy. This would again suggest that when transsexuals, talk about having a female brain in a male body, they are correct. There's also been studies that show that transsexuality can be inherited. That transsexuality probably has a genetic component. Again, here I'm going to insert a little bit of anecdotal evidence. My own father was very probably a transsexual. He told my mother before I was born that he really wanted to be a woman very strongly. Again, it's just anecdotal evidence, but, And, well, what does it mean for transsexuals? Well, I think personally that male to female transsexuals simply have brains that lean more on the feminine side of the gender spectrum. We have brains that show more female characteristics than the average male would. And that makes us feel more feminine. And in fact, there might be a brain circuit in the brain that is for gender identity itself. In fact, there has been some evidence recently from a patient, I believe, they have electrically stimulated a part of her brain during a surgery, and the female patient perceived herself to be male when they performed this stimulation, and perceived other women also to appear as male. So possibly there really is some circuitry in our brain that produces gender identity. And us transsexuals, would simply have this male to female transsexuals would have the female part of the circuit activated, while female to male transsexuals would have the male part activated. And why does this happen? We don't know exactly, but there's been some theories out there, about hormone showers in the womb, which would produce, some abnormal sexual differentiation. But again, gender differentiation doesn't work the same for everybody. Like I said, there's some general trends that you can make. Women are shorter on average, men are taller, men have facial hair, women don't, etc., etc., but that doesn't always hold true. There are some women who are unfortunate enough to have facial hair and to be balding. There are some women who are extremely tall, who are over 6 feet sometimes. There are some men who are extremely short. And I know a woman who is so masculine looking, she could pass for a man if she just cut her hair short. That happens too. And what about our brain and feminization of the brain in male to female transsexuals? Well, I personally don't love to have 100% female brain, you know. In fact, I think I have some behaviors that are just innately masculine. You know, like I said, I think maybe liking computers and liking programming is something that's a masculine behavior. And I totally love computers. And I don't really care what people think about that, you know. I just want to be me. I just want to be happy. It's just that there's probably some kind of circuit in my brain that tells me that I'm happier being female. I'm happier living as a woman. And so that's what I do. And I don't really care to prove, you know, that my brain is 100% female. Because really, is there even such a thing as a 100% female brain? You know, if we assume that gender is a continuum, then the people whose brain is 100% on the female side or 100% on the male side are probably pretty rare. You know, most people are probably just somewhere in between. Okay, so that's it for today, people. I hope you found this video to be helpful. I hope that it was interesting to you. It's possible there's going to be quite a debate sparked by this video, by all the things I have said. Again, feel free to post comments, feel free to post video responses, feel free to send me messages, etc., etc. Okay, bye bye, people.